Hi everybody, I'm Hayley. So I'm 35 and I am based in South Wales, which isn't very sunny at the moment or ever for that matter. So I am now a junior software engineer at a company called TMB Marketing and Communications Limited. So they're based in Surrey, in South England. I actually attended a bootcamp earlier this year. I joined Makers, their December pre-course, their January main course, meaning that I graduated in April, and I was very, very fortunate enough to secure this job not so long afterwards. So I started with TMB at the end of June, and yesterday was my 3 months of being there. So that was quite an exciting moment. Another 3 months to go of probation yet, but we'll get there. Prior to sort of retraining then as a software engineer, I've done lots of different things. The main two, I spent nearly 10 years in corporate motor insurance. So that was more of a serious job at times, a fairly fun atmosphere, but again, quite a serious sort of job roles that I had. And then I published greetings cards for several years. The irony that I was banned from buying the office birthday cards because they were always too rude. So when I left, I decided to spend 4 years publishing them instead. I don't think there's any greater motivator than spite. So that's what I did. And then I'm sure, as everybody knows, there's quite a roller coaster in the economy at the moment. So I thought I'd need something that's stable, structured. What am I good at? And I wanted something that was logical and creative. So I ended up here. And yeah, it was, I mean, this time last year, I was probably just starting to look at actually doing some form of code. And that was some very, very basic free code camp stuff. And here we are now, really.
I love that. So why tech? What made you want to become a developer out of all the things you could have done?
Yeah. So I think sort of having my own business and things like that, anybody who has had any involvement in small business will probably know that you end up using quite a lot of SaaS products, just to kind of fill gaps here and there, make life easier for yourself. So I kept coming up against problems and looking for solutions to them. They didn't exist. And of course, the entrepreneurial brain sort of said, well, can we make these solutions? Obviously, that's not as simple as I thought it would be. So I started again looking at just little bits of code and realized that I liked it. I liked the kind of, I think it's a perfect blend of creativity, whether that's in the front end or just creative problem solving, but then also logic. And of course, considering things like user behavior and stuff like that. There's just a lot of different components to it that I think if you're somebody like me who needs a variety of things to kind of satisfy your brain, then coding's a really good avenue for that.
And you mentioned like you had your own business. Did you end up using the code that you were learning for your own business, or did you go straight into the bootcamp?
So I didn't. I kind of, I'm somebody who, if I make a decision, that's it. I sort of go with it 100%. I give it everything I've got. So once I'd made the decision to retrain, it kind of became my primary focus. So I actually kind of, the business that I had, I essentially shut up shop earlier this year. I will at some point reopen it in a slightly smaller capacity, just so that I don't kind of lose what I feel I'd built over years. Don't want to feel like it went to waste or anything like that. Not that it did, but yeah. And now obviously doing this, it's learning to code is quite a time-consuming exercise. So yeah, there's not much room for anything else, to say the least.
If anyone has any questions, by the way, please do pop them in the chat. This is your opportunity to ask Hayley anything you like. No, it isn't just going to be me, hopefully. You mentioned that you did Makers. There are often lots of boot camps that people can do. And, I speak to quite a few people in that they're never really sure what boot camp they should pick. How come you ended up going with Makers?
Mainly because there was an apprenticeship opportunity that they had, and I kind of thought that would be a great idea if I could work at the same time as as learning, then that would be ideal for me. And I got to the final round of that. I wasn't successful, but I got some really good feedback from the interview. And funnily enough, they pointed me in the direction of Codebar. And then upon my conversations with Codebar and Makers said, well, we've got an affiliation with Codebar. You know, you could do this sort of through Codebar through us. And yeah, was lucky enough to get that opportunity, really. So yeah, just went at it. But yeah, I think when it comes to picking a bootcamp, though, it's funny, I'm not really the blogging type. I love to write, but I don't love to write blogs. But it's a question that so many people have asked me about bootcamps that I ended up writing like a sort of a 20 questions then that you should ask. And it was all kind of the things that in hindsight, I wish I would have known to ask so that I could have got like the absolute most out of my experience. And yeah, so on and so forth, really. Looks like we've got a lot of questions.
Yeah, there's a few questions coming in. If anyone wants to ask these questions, you know, put your camera on and say them, you know, please do. But yeah, I can start going down the list. But yeah, if you do want to ask any yourself, please do.
Hi. Oh, well, thank you. I'm sorry that I'm a little bit late.
That's okay.
I am very interested in the comment that she said about the time commitment, you know, how time consuming it is to learn how to code. So if you could say realistically how long it will take for someone devoting, let's say, a certain number of hours a day, you know, can you put it like that? I mean, I am a mom and I also have my other job. So I want to make sure that I know what I'm getting myself into. And I just want to have an idea of how many hours a day I need to put in order to become a, I don't know, half decent coder.
To be honest with you, this might sound a little bit philosophical, but I think the answer is how can you put in a day?
Wow.
Because the route that I went was through a boot camp. And of course, when you sign up to a boot camp, your expectation is that you'll be sort of maybe 9 to 6, and there might be a few extra hours here and there. But the reality is that when you're actually in that boot camp, you kind of feel like you've got one shot because you're at this boot camp, and at the end of it, you want to be in a position where you are an attractive candidate and that you can get yourself a job as an entry-level developer. And so 9-6 after the first sort of 2 or 3 weeks very quickly turns into 9-9, which turns into sort of, you know, can be later than that. And then you're on the weekends, and it, before you know it, it can be the only thing that you feel like you're doing. So in hindsight, I think that the approach that I took, if I was to do anything differently, it would be to spend 6 to 12 months learning to code first in my own time at a pace I was completely comfortable with, that fit in with my life, and then maybe take the leap into a boot camp when I felt I didn't have to put in all the extra hours that I did. So I think in terms of the time that you have to put in, you can put in what you want to, but it's how much you'll sacrifice outside of that to learn to do it. So for argument's sake, I hadn't really written a line of code, you know, unless we count sort of, for anybody who remembers the MySpace days, kind of perfecting that profile. I hadn't written a line of code for nearly 20 years, and then joined the boot camp, and within 6 months, effectively, I was in a junior engineer role. But the amount of hours that went in, it, you know, it must have been anywhere between 50, 80 hours a week. It was all in. So I think if you've got other commitments, prioritize like patience. And the longer that it takes you to learn something, it doesn't mean that you're not getting there. You're just getting there in a way that works for you.
Thank you, because I mean, I'm always thinking, what is the way for women with family responsibilities, etc., you know, to get into these tech careers, because, you know, I cannot really do away with my responsibilities, you know, because then somebody will call social services. So I'm trying to help Codebar as well think, you know, how they can help women, you know, with certain responsibilities get into tech as well. So thank you for your answer.
No, that's okay. No problem at all. I mean, most of the codebar kind of sessions, any workshops I attended were typically outside of your normal working hours. So you can kind of start there. And I guess the benefit with self-led learning is it's on your time. So there are loads of different tracks that you can follow and that people recommend online that are free. And you can sort of go so far to a point where you might decide that you want to change the way that you learn, but otherwise you just keep going. Consistency is the biggest factor.
And it's also why we're trying to record like as many of these sessions that we do as possible as well, so that you can hopefully, you know, look back at these, you know, whether it's like the, you know, the chat GTP one we did a few weeks ago, you know, about building a game, you know, that was a JavaScript one, like, you know, hopefully you can look at that in your own time, and it isn't just, you know, in the evening. It might be that, you know, you can watch it back, but, you know, if there's anything codebar can do that you think would, you know, help someone in your position, you know, please do let me know, because I'm all, you know, I don't have kids, so it, you know, for me, I think you can only truly understand a position if you've been in it, or, you know, or in it. So, you know, if there's anything codebar can ever do to help, then please do let me know, whether it's like something we could change or do, like, please do let me know.
Thank you.
It's also might be worth checking out Tech Returners. Tech Returners is another organization that specializes in people who are like coming like into tech after like having children, who have maybe taken a break. So I'll pop the name of them in the chat. Yeah, it might be worth also just checking them out as well. Cool. And good luck. It's hard. Mohammed, do you have a question?
Yeah, I have a question, but I just is it okay if I share some like resources or anything like that? Is that okay if I name other organizations that like have programs or like
Yeah.
short? Yeah, so there's another
totally.
organization that's super popular now called Code First Girls, and they kind of like a much more shorter kind of like initial taster, like an 8-week sort of like training around JavaScript or Python, and it's usually runs in the evenings, and it's like once a week. So it's like a good program to like, if you've never coded anything, then go on the taster program, and you can typically, depending upon your work hours, if it's like a 9-to-5 work, you can fit it around, and you can get that sense of, do I like this? Is it something interesting to me, before you go all in to something a bit more. And then they also have like boot camps, and they have like a more of like a structured thing. But I think that could be like a good start potentially. But cool. My question for Hayley, I think she mentioned something about Makers Academy apprenticeship, correct?
Mm-hmm.
And I'm actually in the process of I'm at the first stage of applying for the I think I got the initial take-home task, and I'm just going through that right now. But I mean, what would your advice be for anyone trying to get I know you weren't necessarily successful, but like at least to get to the interview stage of that, what would your advice be? Or
I think if it's an apprenticeship, the expectation is not that you can code. The expectation is that you can show that you can problem solve, or that you can read and divulge information clearly. So I think you just focus on the kind of soft skills that you have, like anything that's relatable to coding. So problem solving, again, your ability to communicate with others. I think those are like, I think people sometimes focus so much on the tech, but the soft skills is so important. Like one of the things that my employer actually said when they were sort of publishing the role that they had was that the tech can be taught, the attitude can't.
Oh, okay.
So
Wow.
if you've got that kind of approach, I think, and I'm a big fan of like being completely genuine yourself as well. So yeah, that's what I'd probably say.
Cool. Fair enough. Thank you for that.
That's okay. No problems. I hope that answers it for you.
Yeah, it does. Another question, I'm going to be cheeky and ask another question, because I think you mentioned you're a bit of an experienced candidate when you initially were going through that process. I'm kind of like similar. I'm just about to turn 35, and sometimes I do worry, like, oh, if I left it a little bit late, like, did you experience any like misgivings around that? And even when you were at the process of applying for jobs, did you, because sometimes I do worry, like, I don't know, if I'm a candidate who's 35 years old and I'm applying for junior roles, is this a big, like, could there be an age bias towards me, or was that anything? Obviously you got your role, so.
No, to be honest, I think like the age is actually really helpful because you've got so much, typically people of our age, I think have got so much more experience in like other areas. So what we can contribute in other ways then.
So we've got quite a lot of questions coming in through the Q&A. I'll work my way from the one that came in first so that we definitely don't miss everyone. But one of them is, how has your transition been from the boot camp to the tech industry?
Baptism by fire, I think, is the easiest way to put it. I think, yeah, the difference between what you learn in a boot camp and the kind of environment that you're in. I mean, they try to simulate it as best as they possibly can, but nothing is going to give you the experience like actually being in the role in a tech environment. So it's been really fast paced. It's been, again, it's quite intense for me. I think I'm very fortunate that the role that I've landed, the people that I'm working with, they're very, very patient, very supportive, which is excellent for me. And yeah, so I think that the kind of transition then has ended up okay. I'm sure that I'd like to be further along in my knowledge than I am, but I think that probably people will say that for the first few years of their career as a developer or an engineer. So I'm kind of just trying to take it day by day, I guess. So yeah, it's rapid, it's fast, and it is very, very different, but it's achievable and it's doable, I think is the short of that. I hope that answers that question.
Yeah, it does. The next question is about the boot camp again, but I am just going to skip that for now because I feel like we've spoken quite a lot about the boot camp already, and I am aware that there are quite a lot of questions coming in. But for those, I saw the second question that came up, that what's the name of it? The boot camp is called Makers.
Yeah, if anybody wants, I'm not really a big social kind of person, but I've got LinkedIn, which is just Hayley Dobbs. There's a post linked on there that I've written, and it's kind of like 20 questions that I think that you should ask a boot camp. So if you're looking at different places and trying to consider where you want to go to learn, if boot camp is the route you're going for, then it's a bunch of things that I think that you should either ask them or ask yourself, or sometimes a mixture of both. Because it's not, I think we can all be, when we decide that we want to do something, you can sometimes be so eager that we jump at the first opportunity we get. Whereas, just like the first person who asked the question, there are life things to consider. So I think you have to make sure that the bootcamp fits for you. So yeah, if anybody wants to have a look at that, I can try and find a link in the meantime, and I'll pop it in the chat.
Perfect. Thank you. Yeah, we'll share a link with that. Maybe we'll also share it in like a follow-up email after this to everyone as well. So the next question is, how did you find the positions that you applied for?
So I applied for quite a few positions. A lot of them were through LinkedIn, Indeed, job boards, things like that. I used Otter. Trying to think what else there was. Haystack, I think, was another one. If there was a tech job app, it was on my phone. And then the role that I actually have, I got through the Makers Bootcamp. So, some boot camps, they do have affiliations or partnerships with other companies. The companies will go to those boot camps to try and find their new hire. And that's an internal application then through the boot camp. So the only other people who will be applying are alumni of that boot camp. And that's the way I ended up getting a role.
Nice. If anyone else has any ways that they've, discovered them, please do, drop them in the chat. We have our job board as well. I know Coding Black Females have another one as well. Yeah, there are quite a few out there.
Yeah.
So the next question is, how did you overcome imposter syndrome if you experienced it?
I think that's something that comes in swings and roundabouts all the time. When you're in an environment with other developers or other trainee developers, like a boot camp, it's only natural that we compare ourselves to others. There were people on that course who were exceptionally good from the start. And I think you do there are still moments now, even though I'm in a position, I love my job, the people I work with are fantastic, but there are still moments where I sit there and I go, oh my God, what am I doing? Like, have I have I made the right decision? Like, how have I looked at this for 2 hours and I've got absolutely nowhere with it? And then you just go at it again the next day and eventually you find a solution. And that kind of, I think you just have to remember all the times that you feel the imposter syndrome, and then the moment that it goes because it clicks or you fix the problem or something like that. But yeah, I think there's a really good podcast on imposter syndrome. I'll try and remember what that is as well, but it's really, really good to listen to. Like, it's just a bit of a booster. But yeah, I think we all get it. And you've just got to remember that, like, you can, it sounds a bit wet, but like, if you want to do something, you can do it. It just, everybody's journey is going to be different. And everybody's going to find those moments where they feel like they've got no idea what they're doing. But from speaking to the developers in my company, they've been doing it 30 years and they still have those kind of things. So I think it's just really natural for us to want to be good. It's not so much imposter syndrome, it's just that we want to be really good at what we do.
Thank you very much. So the next question is, how did you practice and prep for the tech tests? So
I can't actually give you much advice on this because I didn't have to do a tech test for this role. As part of Makers, you do some kind of tech testing, but the way that you go about it is that they offer something called reviews, and it's an external company, and they basically give you a small challenge. You code in front of the person, they watch, record you, and they give you feedback at the end, which is a really helpful exercise. So I don't have direct experience of having to do a technical test for an interview. Those that I spoke to who have done tech tests from my cohort, quite a few of them have said that the people that conducted the tech test, especially if they weren't take-home ones, they were ones that you sort of, where you paired with somebody, was that the feedback they had was that a lot of it was they were looking at how well they could communicate. So even if they didn't necessarily have the right answer, if they could communicate what they were trying to do and how they were trying to approach getting there, then that was worth quite a lot. So it wasn't just a case of, is the answer right or not? It was, even if it was wrong, it was like, how well did you communicate that? Or could you foresee it? Like, you know, if you know that you want to do something, but you don't know how to do it there and then, tell them that. Like, if you hand in a tech test that you've only got 2 hours to do and you get so far, I don't think that there's anything wrong with saying, this is what I've done, these are the next things I would implement, or these are the next approaches, because it just shows that you're thinking about how you can make it better, how you can improve. Even if it's something as straightforward as saying, I'd refactor this to make it a bit, you know, a bit more dry then, or clean. I just think this, yeah, if you can get anything in anywhere, just get it in there somehow.
One thing I've done, I hate tech tests, and I've been a developer for 10 years, and I think it's still hands down the worst thing about being a developer is a tech test. My mind just blanks and I'm awful at them. And actually in ones I've said, is there anything I can prepare for? Because you know, and I've done interviews as well, so I've been the other side, and you want to help the person, you're not there. But hopefully, you know, as a company, you're not setting them up for failure. And so, you know, you can ask, and I've done that before. I'm like, is there anything I can prepare for this, whether it's the technical interview in terms of questions or the tech test? Because the thing is, companies want you to be honest and open. You know, we're not robots, we're not Google, you know, we're not here to know everything. And also on that, I think it's totally okay if you get asked a tech question to say, I don't know. You know, I've been on the, you know, other end when I've been interviewing, and you know when someone doesn't know something, and you know when someone's like blabbering and like almost lying, and that's worse than someone saying, do you know what, actually I don't know, but here is what I would Google to find out the answer. And that response goes a very, very long way, rather than just pretending you know the answer. So the next question is, when will you no longer be classed as a junior dev? As I know it's a title that varies wildly.
For me, I don't know when that will be. It's also not a focus for me. I think my aim at the moment is just to learn everything that I can. And there might come a point where I feel like I say, oh, can we take the junior off now? But I don't see that being in the next sort of 6 months or so. Other roles that I interviewed for, there were some places that had quite a sort of, not a hierarchy, but there was like a process as to how you grew as a developer in terms of your job titles. And I think one of those, they started off with kind of like associates, which were essentially juniors, but they had two parts to that. So you could be like an associate 1 and an associate 2. And then you would sort of be a software developer then without the junior title. But honestly, I don't think the title makes any difference. Really doesn't. There are junior devs who, I mean, I suppose the most obvious one sometimes would be salary, but I think depending on where you are in the country, some junior roles can be paid more than some of the sort of roles that don't have junior on them then. So I think, yeah, I don't know when it'll be, but as long as I stay where I am and I keep learning, then for me personally, I would be happy. But yeah, I think it can vary.
Nice, thank you. And the next question is, did you come to any realizations or finding preferences for what area of coding to go into?
Not necessarily. I think I wanted to remain full stack if I could, in terms of the kind of areas that I wanted to be in. And that was mainly so that I could satisfy the kind of logical side of things, with more back-end stuff, and then use creativity in terms of like front-end design and stuff like that. So I wanted to try and remain full stack. And then I guess as a junior, you don't necessarily know where your skill set is going to be. So if I had found out that I was rubbish at one thing and great at the other, then I probably would have focused on the one that I was actually good at. But I guess in terms of like area of coding, if that's what you mean by that in terms of full stack front or back end, that would be my answer. In terms of technologies, I think it was more a case of what was most marketable after bootcamp. What could I learn that would make me, the roles that I was applying for then, where were the most opportunities, and that kind of thing. But of course, if you mean something different by that question, then by all means let me know and I'll try and answer it a little better.
Thank you very much. Next question is, what I'm assuming this is for your current job. What role did you join for? Did the company ask data structures and algorithm questions in the interview?
No, they didn't. So so the role that I have now is a junior software engineer. So it's a full stack role. Obviously, it's a junior role. A lot of the questions were focused around what I had learned in my bootcamp, because the company was hiring through makers directly. They had an understanding of what we would have learned during the course. So a lot of it was focused on that. And there were questions around my approach to debugging, my just kind of what had I learned, and asked me to sort of talk about examples and not necessarily bring up code or show code. But I think a lot of the focus was on my approach to problem solving, as opposed to really sort of drill down specific sort of questions. There was another sort of longer interview that I did with a different company, and they asked a few more sort of questions along those lines. But again, it was just talking about, again, yeah, a little bit about architecture. What do I know about it, or can I explain it? It was more a case of, could I explain terms, as opposed to, could I give really good examples of where I've used them? But again, I'm not sure whether that's common for junior roles or not, because ultimately I wasn't applying for roles as a junior with 12, 18 months commercial experience. I was applying as somebody fresh out of boot camp. So I think the expectations of what I would know would be more terminology as opposed to the implementation of that. Yeah.
Thank you. Someone said that they also attended Makers and graduated in June. How many from your cohort would you say have gone on to get jobs?
So my cohort was a little different. There were 24 of us, I believe, in my cohort. 4 of them were already employed. They were sent by their company to retrain, to move into a different area of the business, into the software side of it. And one of them had a job to leave and join once he had completed the bootcamp. He was a computer science teacher before he did the bootcamp, but he just came to kind of upskill his own coding knowledge, ready to join this company. So that would leave 19 of us, and 2, 3. I believe there are now 4 of us, I think, who've been employed since. There was myself. I think 3 of the girls have been employed. One of the guys was employed straight away. He was an exceptional candidate. I've got to praise him. He was incredibly good at what he did. He was very, very focused on front end, but very, very good at it. So the 4 of us who've been employed so far. As for the rest of the cohort, I think there are some that are considering returning to jobs that they did before, like the industries or things like that. But yeah, I think that's the answer. I've just seen it in there. Only 1 person graduated in June. I think, again, the hiring market has changed, I think, even more since I finished in the April. So I think that there are not necessarily less roles, but there is a lot of competition, I think. There are a lot of people who have done boot camps, people who did them in like 2016 and, you know, the years following that. There were a number of them, but there were enough jobs for boot campers, whereas I think there are just a lot of boot camp graduates now looking for that junior role. So I think in terms of finding a position, what worked for me was not approaching it with the quantity element, but more of where do I actually want to work, and how well suited, how can I align myself perfectly with this place, but it be genuine as well. And I think that was what helped me to stand out then to get the position that I did.
The next question is, what was the most useful piece of feedback or advice you received during your job search?
So this is one from my mum. So my mum wrote CVs for 30 years as a freelancer. So I kind of trust her input when it comes to roles. And that was to remember that when you're doing an interview, you are also interviewing them. And if you can approach it that way, 1, it takes away some of the nerves, because you put yourself on an even keel with them. They're not authoritative in that position. Yes, they are looking to see if you're suitable for the role. You're also looking to see whether you want to go there as well. And I think that was probably the most useful piece of feedback, in the sense that it helped my approach. So I wasn't fearful. It didn't make me reluctant to apply for jobs. I didn't look at something and think, oh, could I, couldn't I? I just went for it. And I think that's probably another point, is when it comes to like the job search. Yeah, it's annoying having to apply for so many jobs, because I hear of people like putting 200 applications in a week and things like that. But also, if you don't go for it, then you're never going to get that opportunity. Isn't there something about missing the shots you don't take, or something like that? Some quote. That's terrible. But yeah, it's that kind of premise, I think. So, and I guess in the job search, feedback or advice, I think you've just got to try and find out how you align outside of the tech stuff as well. Because if there are loads and loads of applicants, we've all seen the LinkedIn jobs where it's like 300 applicants and the job posting was put up 2 hours ago, and you're like, oh my God, do I even do it? If you imagine that everybody had the same level of tech experience as you, and tech didn't even come into it, where else can you align with that company? How else can you stand out from the crowd aside from your tech skills? Yeah, I think that would probably be my advice in terms of the job search, I guess.
Okay, this one we haven't really touched upon. What kind of projects and how many projects did you have in your portfolio / GitHub when you applied?
So through the bootcamp, you do lots of like little projects by yourself as you're learning, and they're very kind of like isolated cases for whatever you're learning that week, I guess. With Maker specifically, there were 3 projects. We did one that was a clone of an Airbnb type thing. There was another one which was like a Facebook clone. And then the last project was the final project of the course. And that's where you're put into a group of anywhere between 4 and 6 students. You've got an idea, or you've been given an idea, and you then have to turn that into an application of some sort. In terms of how they sort of came up then in my interviews and how I talked about them, I focused primarily on the last one. That's where I kind of steered them in any way, just because that was the one that I felt showed off the skills the best. It also looked the best when it was deployed. So I think if you've got a really good application that you've built, if you can get it deployed, then it's really easy then to just say, oh yeah, here's a link. You can take a look, use it. Like, give them an opportunity to use what you've built, because you can look at the code all day, and I can't imagine that anybody's going to sit and read through your entire code base. But if you can give them a link to something that works, ultimately, like, the user's experience is just as important. So give it to them. So it was 3 main projects that we had. And yeah, in terms of asking about it, it was my approach to it, how we dealt with like, did we use a pipeline? How did we deal with merge conflicts? Really kind of simple stuff, but testing, did we do any testing? If so, what did we use? It was kind of, again, a lot of the approach and the tools and technologies used, but not necessarily really drilled down into what it was.
One thing you could do as well is you could build like your own portfolio site and then link to this other project that you've built from that. So then you've got 2 projects to show off that, so there's lots of ways that you can do that. But yeah, building your own portfolio site is a really nice way to just coding. It's another example of a project that you've built, and it doesn't have to be super technical. It's just another example of a coding project that you've done that you can show off.
Yeah, I would agree with you, definitely.
How do you find being a junior in a remote role?
I love it. It's what I wanted, to be honest with you. As I said, I worked for myself for a number of years beforehand, so I was used to the kind of autonomy, the being at home, managing my own schedule, all that kind of stuff. So the idea of commuting wasn't something I wanted, but obviously if it came to it, then I was more than happy to do that to get a foot in the door. Working remotely, I'm quite lucky. I get to work with 2 of the developers in particular quite often. So we'll pair on things. They're really receptive that if I've got a problem, I can just pick up a Slack call and they'll be on there to help me and see where we can go from there. So I think as long as you are committed and you're good at managing your own time, then working from home is easy. And I think that you probably actually give a little bit more because you realize that you're not spending an hour and a half in the car, every day, or sometimes, each way. So if I need to stay for an extra half an hour sometimes, then I do, and I don't ever feel resented about it. Like, I'm happy to just stay there and get on with it. So yeah, I think it's tricky as a junior. People worry that you might not get the support that you need. But I think if a remote business is wanting to take on a junior, then the expectation is that they will provide you with that support in some way. It's not for everyone, though. I get that.
Nice. Thank you very much. Someone's spoken about how they find it quite complicated, like explaining technical concepts and explaining code, and they're asking how could they get better at that?
Analogies. I am just such a massive fan of using everyday ways to explain something. I can't, off the top of my head now, I'm trying to even think of an example. And the developers that I work with do sometimes laugh at the things that I come out with. But if you find a term that you're struggling to explain, and even if you don't do it yourself to begin with, you go and use, I don't know, ChatGPT, something like that, ask it to explain it to you using an analogy, and using something simple. And I think once you understand it in that way, you get a better understanding of it from a technical perspective. Because I think the issue with not being able to explain things technically is not because we don't understand them. It's just because we don't have enough experience of explaining these things over and over again. It would be like learning Spanish. If you've never learned it before, you might be able to say, I don't know, a couple of the days of the week. But if then somebody asked to talk to you about weekends and weeks and explain all the days in them, you might get a little bit tripped up because you're just not used to doing it every single day. Whereas, as you learn more, you get better and better at it. So I would go that route. I would just go straight for the analogies and see if you understand them.
It reminded me of a blog post that I came across many, many years ago. I've actually just found it and I'll share the link in a second. But it's about promises in JavaScript. And, that's an example of, but someone in this blog post, they've explained it as a donut hole in the wall. And there's diagrams and what you're saying about analogies reminded me of this blog post. I just found it and I've just shared it. And it's honestly, I think, one of the best descriptions of and write-ups of promises I've ever seen. And it's using buying donuts as the description for it. And actually another way I think is coaching. You can come along and coach at something like codebar and you're practicing explaining those technical concepts every single session to different people. So no two people are going to understand a for loop maybe in the same way. So you may have to explain it in two different ways. And the earlier you can start practicing those communication skills, the better. And honestly, I think junior developers make the best coaches at codebar because they get it. They understand what it's like to find that thing really confusing. Or, if you get a junior developer explaining a function and a developer who's 20 years into their career explaining a function, the junior person explains it better because they've just recently got it and they understand what it feels like. Whereas the person 20 years in has completely forgotten how to explain it. So, you don't have to be a super experienced developer to start coaching at something like codebar, and that will help you. It's like any skill, you just need to keep practicing. Learning a language, like I live in France, I'm trying to learn French. The more I just speak it, you were just saying, about Spanish, like the more I speak French, the better I'm going to get. And I don't have to have long conversations. I can just have loads of tiny interactions, and it means I'm getting better. I'm building up confidence, and that for me is so key. So like start coaching honestly at something like codebar or another organization, because it's amazing how much that can give you the confidence of talking about technical concepts. Okay. Oh, we've got 7 minutes left. Okay. I'm just flying through. Do you know if it's common that companies provide support for neurodiverse people?
I think it's actually really common in tech. So I'm neurodiverse, I'm diagnosed ADHD and medicated for it. I've told my company about it. They are, to be honest, they didn't bat an eyelid. I think I'm quite fortunate. I don't ask them particularly for any specific support, but they are pretty receptive to my quirks, I guess, and the way that I do things differently sometimes.
Superpower.
It's, I think that, like, again, I suppose it depends on your neurodiversity, but for me, I know that sitting at a desk all day isn't ideal. So if I get my brain stuck, then I will just tell them I'm taking the dog out for 10 minutes, and that's not a problem. So I think that it is quite common. that they are pretty receptive to it. I guess I'm fairly open about it. I go to therapy probably sometimes weekly, sometimes fortnightly, depends how I want to do it. Working from home, you would think that might make it simpler, but it is an hour to drive to the place that I go. So I'm away for 3 hours of the day. And the way that I've kind of made it work is that I've said, if I go, it'll be a Tuesday. It'll always be at this time. And do you want me to just work on the hours after or over the week? And I think because I approached it, I guess, in a problem solving way of, I need this, how can I do it that's feasible for all of us? That if I want to work it back, I can, if it's not the end of the world, if I can't fit it in that week. So they are pretty accommodating. And I think from speaking to other people, that's pretty common in this industry.
Yeah, totally.
Also, because our neurodiversity makes us pretty good at it. So yeah, it swings and roundabouts.
Would you be able to give an example of the actual types of tasks you do on a day-to-day basis?
Yeah. So depending on the day, some days I could spend the whole day peering. That's what I've done today. So we're working on building a new workflow, which is to do with the placement of advertising campaigns. So it's to do with the assets and the images and the copy that's involved in that. So a day like today could typically be sat kind of working out the logic. How are we gonna tackle the ticket in front of us? How can we break it down? It's very conversational. And then it could be more so that the other developer will do most of the coding and I'll have inputs here and there. Other days it could be a similar complexity of ticket, but the developer will navigate more and I will do the typing and gives me an opportunity to answer questions. There are sort of smaller tickets that they might give me, which might be, I think there was one the other day that was just about including a timestamp somewhere in the code base. And it was just so that there was a record of the last time that a piece of data had been updated. So it's a pretty small ticket in a massive code base. So the navigating the code base is the tricky bit. But on the other hand, the first ticket that I was given was to redo the company website. So it's been very, very different in terms of the complexity of them. But again, I think if you're in the right environment, it doesn't matter what ticket they give you, as long as you can ask for help on it. They expect you to be able to, all right, try and do it yourself, have a go. But if you get stuck, just ask for help. I don't think there's any expectation for people to just come in and start writing code. People want you to, but it's not because they need you to start writing code. It's because they want to build your confidence and they want you to feel like you're contributing to the environment that you're in. If you're hiring a junior developer, or an entry-level developer, you're not expecting them to just come in, navigate your code base, pick up a ticket and get on with it. It's a huge learning curve. They know that, and they know that when they take you on, it's not a case of we've hired a developer to do tasks. It's an investment for them. If you're a good developer, you're going to be there for a long time. So yeah, it's varied. But that's my experience of it, is that if it's been too tricky, I'm not fearful for taking it on because I know I can ask for help.
And that I think that links to all level, what you said earlier about they're not expecting you to come in and just start doing tickets and doing tasks. It's the same for all, levels of developer, particularly when you're working with these huge code bases. No company is expecting any developer to come in and just start bashing out tickets straight away. It's just not an expectation. Someone has said, do you have tips on learning different languages at the same time?
Depending on whether you're already in a role or not, I'd ask why there were different languages at different times, because I think that perhaps a more common approach is to stick with one, because a lot of them are pretty agnostic in that if you're really fairly competent at one, then you can switch to something else and it will become slightly easier. But I'd ask the question why you were learning multiple languages at once. And again, if that's in an attempt, this is again personal opinion, but if that's in an attempt to be more marketable to the job world, I think that you're better to apply for 10 jobs that you actually have the skill set in than apply for 50 where you've just got breadcrumbs of all the kind of little bits of languages. If you can count to 10 in 5 languages, then that's great, but you wouldn't apply for a job that required you to speak, you know, conversational of the one language. Whereas if you just focused on learning that one, then you'd have a better shot of getting it.
Yeah, good answer. And a lot of it is translatable, you know.
Yeah.
That, you know, and it's the same as, you know, learning a language. Like, you know, I'm learning French and actually it's really similar to Italian, but actually I don't need to be learning both at the same time. Like if I just get really good at French and then in 2 years picked up a bit of Italian, I'd see loads of similarities, and that's exactly the same for programming languages as well. And on that note, someone has actually said, is there any advantage to speaking European languages in the coding world?
I really wouldn't know the answer to that. Again, I would probably assume it's based on the industry that you're in. If you have a team of developers that are across Europe, then yeah, it might be handy.
Yeah.
If you know, got an office in Italy to speak Italian. But yeah, I think it's, in terms of an advantage, I think it's probably just that you could apply for roles that require you to speak that language.
And they would often, you know, if, you know, all of the room, you know, if you're in a meeting, you know, I've had this, if you're in a meeting with 8 people and half speak Italian, but everyone speaks English, they're going to go with English as like the universal language, because that's what everyone can speak. But yeah, I agree with you. Like it won't help, but it, you know, there could be the odd case where it definitely does help. But yeah. I think one question to wrap up, which I think is a really nice final question, is if you could give Hayley from a year ago one bit of advice, what would you say to her?
Chill out. Yeah. Yeah, I think if we're specifically relating it to becoming a developer, I would probably say try and achieve what you've achieved now, but over a longer period of time. Like, yeah. I think I am incredibly grateful for the position that I'm in right now. I have a great job. I work with great people, and it has had a huge impact on my personal life in just having what I have today. And I'm incredibly grateful to have gotten there. But by doing it through a boot camp, it didn't come without its sacrifices. It is an incredibly intense way to enter this world, sort of thing, and get a career in the development industry. So I think if I was to do anything different or give myself the advice, it would be to slow down, take it at make sure that I take time for myself. Don't neglect all the other areas of my life just because I absolutely want to become a developer. And that's, blinkers on. We're only looking one way. I think it would just be to say, like, it doesn't matter. Like, if it takes you as long as it takes you, just persevere, do it at a time, in a time and a way that is suitable for you, and make sure that you look after every other kind of part of your life then that you have, because ultimately all of those things help you become a more well-rounded individual, and a better developer, really.